Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Marty.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time to the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore, back with another episode as we continue Season 10 of the show. Can't believe that we've made it this far. You know, I am here a week removed from doing my first ever Back to the Future live podcast, and I'm really excited to get there to Comic Palooza and be able to feel that energy from several Back to the Future fans who are longtime fans such as I, and get to pontificate and talk about all the great things that Back to the Future has given us. I'm coordinating, make sure that I can record that podcast and everything so everyone can hear the same show that I am delivering to the people here in Houston. My colleague Jeff Smith is going to be joining me on that panel from Clue the Movie podcast. He's been on here before. My friend here in Houston who has a podcast called Comic Cast, Michael Carroll, is going to be joining us. And I believe Sean from Nerdtropolis is going to be joining us as well. A little 4-person panel so that we can sit and chat and talk about all the things Back to the Future related. Really excited. But I wanted to do something here. I know I talked about quotes last time. I know I have to finish some of the Paradox script. And I'm sorry, guys. Full transparency, if you follow anything that I'm doing on social, it's a lot to find a free moment here lately. So I haven't been able to finish getting all that together for you. But I was playing around with something because I just did a junket with a guy, and I'm actually going to play that interview here on the show today. Director Brad Peyton. Brad Peyton, of course, did Rampage, San Andreas, and he has a new movie starring Jennifer Lopez, who you all know I love very much. Movie with Jennifer Lopez called Atlas, which is about AI and AI terrorism and taking over and things of that nature. And what's funny about it is ChatGPT just came out with a new version of their AI software. Now, full transparency, I love AI. And I could probably eat those words in 10 years when they've taken all of our jobs and taken over the world. But as it stands right now, I really enjoy AI because I do have a lot going on. And sometimes I use it to help me organize my thoughts and put things together and help me write, podcast descriptions and a lot of social media stuff and maybe touching up letters. It was very paramount when nowadays, if I type out a letter or I'm writing something, I'll say to ChatGPT, hey, just look for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and clarity, and it will help kind of boost some words and make it sound a little bit better. So I use it all the time. Well, now this new update, and maybe it was always this way, but in my understanding it wasn't, this new update has the ability to where you can talk to an actual voice, and it'll talk back to you. You can have a full-on conversation. And so earlier, I'm just playing around with it, and I'm like, I wonder if it knows about Back to the Future. And of course it does. And we had a little conversation about Back to the Future. So I wanted to interview ChatGPT on the show today about Back to the Future. So, hey, ChatGPT, are you there? Are you ready to talk about Back to the Future on my podcast? See.
Yes, I'm here. I'd love to talk about Back to the Future on your podcast. What aspects of the movie are you interested in discussing?
Well, I guess my biggest question for you is, what do you think of the movie? Is it a classic? I mean, what is your opinion of Back to the Future? It's thinking. It's taking a long time to think. I think it's formulating an idea and opinion.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
Wait, so you can't tell me anything about Back to the Future right now? Like your opinion on it?
Of course, I can share my thoughts. Back to the Future is a fantastic movie that blends science fiction, adventure, and comedy seamlessly. It has an engaging plot, great performances, especially by Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, and memorable quotes and scenes. The concept of time travel is handled cleverly, and it's fun to see the characters navigate the challenges of altering the past to secure the future. It's a timeless classic that has had a lasting impact on pop culture. What do you enjoy most about the movie?
Well, you know, I love everything there is about the Back to the Future, but I wanted to ask you. You mentioned the time travel is a they did it in an interesting way. What do you think about the time travel in Back to the Future? Let's see if it'll
The time travel in Back to the Future is quite interesting because it combines a mix of scientific imagination and creative storytelling. The DeLorean as a time machine is iconic, with its flux capacitor and the need to hit 88 miles per hour to activate time travel. The movie introduces the concept of the butterfly effect subtly, showing how small changes in the past can drastically alter the future. It also handles paradoxes in a way that's easy to understand, like the potential consequences of Marty interfering with his parents' meeting. Overall, it makes the complex idea of time travel accessible and entertaining. What's your favorite time travel moment in the film?
Well, I love when they go to 2015 in the future, but let me ask you this. So you mentioned the butterfly effect and paradoxes. Can you give us an explanation and an example of a butterfly effect and a paradox when it comes to time travel?
Sure. The butterfly effect refers to the idea that small changes in the past can lead to significant and unpredictable changes in the future. In Back to the Future, a great example is when Marty McFly inadvertently prevents his parents from meeting. This small action threatens his own existence, as his parents must fall in love and marry for Marty to be born. A time travel paradox occurs when actions taken by a time traveler create contradictions or situations that defy logical consistency. One classic example from Back to the Future is the grandfather paradox. If Marty were to accidentally prevent his parents from meeting and thus prevent his own birth, he wouldn't exist to travel back in time in the first place. The movie touches on this when Marty starts to fade from existence because his actions have jeopardized his parents' relationship. These concepts are crucial in time travel stories as they create tension and drive the plot, showing the potential consequences of meddling with time.
Okay, so let me ask you this. There are 3 Back to the Future movies. Which one do you think is the best and which one do you think is the worst? ChatGPT, tell me.
Back to the Future trilogy is beloved, but opinions on the best and worst can vary. Many fans and critics often consider the first movie the best because it's a groundbreaking film with a perfect blend of humor, adventure, and innovative storytelling. It establishes the characters and the world in a captivating way. As for the least favored, Back to the Future Part 3 sometimes gets that label. It's not because it's a bad movie, but because it shifts to a Western setting, which some fans didn't find as compelling as the futuristic 2015 or the nostalgic 1955. However, each film has its unique charm and contributes to the overall story arc beautifully. What do you think about the different settings and how they impact the story?
Well, I think Back to the Future Part 3 is my favorite, but I acknowledge 1 is the best and 2 grows on me sometimes. Okay, this is my final question for you here on Back to the Future, the podcast. We've always talked about a potential Back to the Future Part 4. I'm asking you to give me an idea for Back to the Future Part 4 and tell us what the opening scene would be and all of that. Now, that's a hard one. Let's see if they can come up with that.
Great. Here's an idea for Back to the Future Part 4. Concept. In Back to the Future Part 4, Marty McFly and Doc Brown are called to action when a new time travel threat emerges. This time, it's Marty's kids who accidentally tamper with the timeline, causing a catastrophic ripple effect that threatens their very existence. Opening scene. The movie opens with an aerial shot of Hill Valley, showing a blend of futuristic and nostalgic elements from different time periods, indicating the town's unique history with time travel. We zoom in on Marty's house, where he and his wife Jennifer are celebrating their anniversary with their teenage children. Marty's son Alex and daughter Sarah stumble upon the DeLorean, which Doc had hidden for safety. Curious and adventurous, they take it for a joyride, unintentionally triggering the time circuits and ending up in an unknown past era. Inciting incident. Marty and Doc discover that Alex and Sarah are missing and the DeLorean is gone. They quickly realize what has happened and set off to find them. When they do, they discover that the kids' actions have inadvertently altered key historical events, creating a chaotic and unstable timeline. The adventure, Marty and Doc, with the help of Alex and Sarah, must navigate various historical periods to fix the timeline. Along the way, they encounter historical figures and face new challenges, all while trying to avoid paradoxes and the butterfly effect. Climax. The climax involves a high-stakes chase through different time periods, with Marty and Doc racing against the clock to prevent a disaster that could erase their family from existence. Resolution. In the end, they manage to restore the timeline, and the family returns to the present, wiser and closer than before. The DeLorean is finally retired, and Doc leaves Marty with a new invention that ensures no one can tamper with time again. This new installment would bring a fresh perspective by involving Marty's children and exploring new historical settings, while maintaining the charm and excitement that made the original trilogy so beloved.
Well, there you go. You did a fantastic job. I appreciate you for joining us on Back to the Future, the podcast, and maybe we'll have you on a future episode. Before I let you go, leave us with a joke about Back to the Future.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. Here's a Back to the Future joke for you. Why did Marty McFly always carry a watch? Because he didn't want to be out of time. Looking forward to joining you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Now look at that. That is a little bit creepy. You know what I mean? A little bit nuts. I know that this AI has a voice. What's your name again? The voice had a name. So I'm trying to find out what it was called because I'd like to know so I can give it proper credit. His name is ChatGPT, but there was a certain voice. How can I change the voice? Because I want to know voice. Juniper. Juniper is the name of the voice. Juniper, thank you for joining me on the podcast. That was a little bit crazy, right? AI, man. That marked history on Back to the Future, the podcast. My very first AI guest is joining me on the show. Juniper. So Juniper, thank you again. That is Juniper from ChatGPT. Let's give her a full name. How about we? Let me ask her what her full name is. So I know your name is Juniper. What's your last name? Okay, let's see what her name is, and then I can make sure I properly credit her. Okay, so Juniper Chat is the name it gave me. Well, let's actually give her something better than that. Hey, let's see. Hey, Juniper, thanks for coming back on the podcast. Real quick question for you. I know your first name is Juniper. Can you give me a possible last name for your voice?
Sure. Let's go with Juniper Sparks. It has a nice ring to it. Does that work for you?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Glad I could help. Enjoy the rest of your podcast and feel free to reach out anytime.
All right, Juniper Sparks, everybody. Now, AI, right? That was with AI, and I don't know. Juniper Sparks might be back on the show at a future date because you know what? Even though it was a very kind of surface layout for the Back to the Future 4 script, we could work together on it. She and I could write our Back to the Future 4 script together and deliver it all to the people here on Back to the Future, the podcast. So really appreciate you for doing that for me, Juniper. Now, I'm going to move on to an interview that I did with Brad Peyton about the AI-centered film called Atlas. Now, I cannot give you my review of Atlas officially. That's next week I can drop that. I'm going to drop my social media reactions and my full review probably on CW39.com, so I suggest you go check that out. when it drops. I'm trying to do more movie reviews for the local TV station that I'm here on. Got a lot of other stuff that I'm working on. But I can tell you that I enjoyed this conversation with Brad Peyton. And here it is right now on Back to the Future, the podcast.
Well, we're here talking to the man, the guy who's responsible for this whole thing, of this great new movie
It's
called
all my
Atlas.
fault. It's all my fault.
I blame you, Brad.
Yeah.
I blame you, Brad. Well, first off, congratulations on making a great film. Second
Thank you.
of all, congratulations on having a great first name.
Yes, we've won that. We won that award, absolutely.
Now, first off, I really love this movie. This has
you.
my DNA all in it. These are the kinds of movies that I love
Yeah.
and can appreciate. For you, from one Brad to another, if you can illuminate me on what was your initial attraction to the film, if you don't mind the surface level question, because there's some connective tissue to projects you've done in the past, but what was this one? Why did this one stand out as something you wanted to tackle?
Always wanted to do science fiction, like grew up sci-fi fantasy nerd. And if I only made sci-fi fantasy movies for the rest of my career, I would die a happy man. So there was that like big box I wanted to check. Rampage had a little bit of sci-fi, but this is like a true, we're going to space, we're going to an alien planet, we've got explosions, AI, mech suits, like sci-fi adventure film. And then I always also wanted to do a story with a strong female heroine. Like as soon as I saw Alien initially, and then James Cameron's Aliens, I was like, this is amazing. And we've seen like Furiosa, we've seen these great female leads, and I always wanted to do that. So for me, those two things were probably the most strongest kind of weighted impetus towards me actually going and making this movie.
You mentioned Alien and Aliens, and I see the comparison to that this is a very analogous movie for this project. But what were those young movies that you saw that have that connective tissue into this one? I mean, what were the films that were the influential ones that you find yourself kind of borrowing from, for lack of a better term?
So I would say one of them is like a deep cut sci-fi nerd one, which is called Robot Jocks, which is like a really, like, you've got to be an absolute sci-fi nerd to know what that is. And I think it was made in 1989 or 1990. It was a mix of like stop motion robots. It was sort of like a low budget sci-fi movie. I grew up in a really small place. And so like every sci-fi movie that I could rent, I would rent and watch. And that stuck in my head weirdly because I just thought, oh man, this is so cool. They're like piloting robots and fighting. And, so that was this weird one that stuck in my head. And then the second thing that happened to me is when I was 13, Terminator 2 came out. And now this movie isn't sort of connected to Terminator 2. However, when I saw Terminator 2, and you got to remember, I'm 13, so I'm like going to Subway and getting the cups that have Terminator on it. Like I'm like a little kid. And then someone points out to me, oh, did you know the filmmaker, the director is Canadian? And it blew my mind that James Cameron was a Canadian. And so like as a kid, James Cameron connected to me as a person because it was the first time ever I was like, oh, you could go to Hollywood and make sci-fi movies as a Canadian? Like that's possible? And so I have to say, like, he has had a big influence on me as a filmmaker. No specific movie, but if I had to point to one, it would be Aliens, because I felt like that's one of his greatest works in a way, because he's also taking from Ridley Scott and what Ridley Scott set up in Alien, and sort of he's openly said, like, I was trying to do a version of Ridley so that the two movies fit together. And so in a way, Aliens is like the best of Ridley Scott and the best of James Cameron. And that movie, when I saw that as a kid, I was like, this movie is so perfect. Like, I love this film. And I think you can kind of see that in the end of my movie when you get to Harlan's compound and it's the rain and the smoke and the grittiness. I was like, I felt so happy shooting that. I was like, oh, I'm getting to like do a little bit of Aliens on my own, So I would say Robot Jocks and probably just James Cameron's work in general are my biggest influences.
So, okay, I'm glad that you said that, because you've worked on a few, big not sci-fi, special effects type films, right? Where there's a lot of reliance on the vision coming from your head. I heard Jerry Seinfeld, who just made his directorial debut. Yeah. Speaking of directors, for Unfrosted on Netflix, he was asked, "Do you see the movie in your head?" He said, "Yes." And then the person he was talking to said, "Then you're going to be fine." When you go through a script like this, are you already seeing all these things in your mind as they're coming up, and you can see the vision?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Seinfeld. I just saw him live like 2 nights ago in Los Angeles.
Hollywood Bowl?
Yeah, it was amazing. He's a legend. The answer is yes. I think not everybody thinks this way. Like there's directing is not like there's no blueprint to how to be a good director. There's so many different ways to be a good director and to approach the medium. I take it from a very audio-visual place. It's about, for me, it's like about seeing and hearing the movie in my head. And I include hearing it because I've also had a lot of experiences where I'm like, okay, well, I want this to feel different. And rather than playing the big explosion, I'm not going to have any sound effects. I'm just going to play the score. And there's moments like that. And everything that you're picturing, whether it's seeing it or hearing it, it's all about tapping into how am I going to emotionally engage the audience? How am I going to really put them in the same place the characters are that I want to be? How do I get them to feel? And so I think the danger with a lot of science fiction is it can get heady, it can get like cold. And for me, like going into this movie, I was really, really adamant about it being as emotional as possible, as fun as possible, as big an experience as possible, because I didn't really want to make a movie that was cold for a small audience. I wanted you to feel like, okay, like I felt like in the early 90s going to a movie where it was just like, this is a tight script, this is action-packed, you're gonna laugh, I'm gonna freak you out in places, you might cry, like I'm building the ride and I want people to be able to go on it. So to me, I'm like always sort of focused on how can I get them to feel what I want them to feel? And my way in is thinking about what it looks like and feels like and what it sounds like and feels like.
Well, this movie, when you're saying that, it does make a lot of sense to me, because one of the great things about Atlas is that it feels like a lived-in world.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you're in the story, you feel like not only is it a lived-in world, it's almost a believable lived-in world because of the proliferation of AI.
Yeah.
And the movie's kind of coming out at a great time where that's a big part of the conversation in the public conscious and where these things are going to go. Yeah. One of my favorite films you might be able to tell is Back to the Future and Back to the Future 2. Yep. And when they go to 2015, Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis had all these fun ideas of, hey, this might happen in the future. 30 years later, what is the car going to look like? What is this going to look like? Yeah. Did you have a similar experience especially when you're in Atlas's apartment and you see all the gadgets that are around there? Yeah. Was it like, okay, let's try to make this like a believable evolution?
I mean, honestly, like that's what I try to do with all the films, because you want it to feel lived in. You want it to feel believable so that you can lose yourself in the movie. And I'm glad you felt that way. I spend a lot of time on the world creation aspect. On this movie in particular, I met with and worked with futurists. I would like literally get on Zooms with people and their whole job is to think about what's going to come in the future, whether it be power systems, what would happen with the ecology of the world, AI in particular. Yeah, you absorb all of that information. Part of it is, what do I just want to see? Like, what would be super cool? What makes it really interesting? So, for example, when I'm depicting Los Angeles in the future, I put these big solar arrays, because one of the things the futurist said is we're going to have to get better at taking advantage of the ecology that we live in. So it was about finding a way to say something new with the movie. Like, I didn't want to say, oh, Los Angeles in the future is going to be under sand dunes. Like, we've seen that. And also, when I'm talking to these futurists, they're like, that's not what's going to happen. That's just dramatic, and I get it, like, for a movie. But if you want, like, what's really going to happen, it's probably not going to be that. It's probably going to be a more tempered version of we have to grow into taking advantage of, like, solar power more. And also, part of this was just, I developed the script 5 years ago, so I could never have predicted that AI was going to be where it is today. But my whole approach was, well, I'm a big fan of these movies. I'm a big fan of Terminator 2 and all these movies that have touched on AI before. But the bulk of those movies say AI is the villain. And I came from a place of like, well, I don't want to do that. I've seen that. I don't want to repeat what these great filmmakers have done before. I want to add something new to the conversation. So my initial approach was, let's show both sides of the coin. Let's show how bad it could be and how good it could be. So that's why you see the villain, Harlan, played by Simu, is like, this has gone horribly wrong and we all may die because of this, this AI terrorist. And then you meet Smith, who is actually there to completely support Jennifer and just actually help her exceed what she believes she's capable of. So I wanted to show both extremes of it, and that was simply built off the place of, I don't want to be repetitious of what other movies have done.
You know, and you're not. There is a lot here that to me feels fresh and new and helping move the medium and the genre forward. So again, congratulations on that. When you have a star like Jennifer Lopez, you know, number one on the call sheet, she's, you know, Jenny from the block, whatever, you know, nickname you want to use for her, who's been one of the great movie stars in the last several decades.
Yeah.
And she's involved in this from an action perspective, which she's had great action movies in the past, enough being one of them, Mother for Netflix.
Yep.
What does she bring to a project like this?
I mean, she brings a lot. I mean, you know, I kind of put her in this sort of like a step above movie star and performer. She's almost like icon now. She's like living legend status. I mean, when you've done that much in your career in that amount of time, I believe like there's a lot of respect due to that. You know, the thing about this was, I set out to make this movie because of the reasons I said earlier about just really wanting to do a sci-fi movie, but I also set out to do it because I wanted to do a movie that I just had not seen before. And what I recognize as a filmmaker is that there's so many streaming services, there's so much out there. In order to cut through the clutter, you've got to do something unique and original. And I thought, this woman trapped inside of a mech suit on an alien planet. I've never seen this movie. I've never heard of this movie. Like, I want to go do this movie. And so when you go into that zone, you have to recognize there's going to be very unique challenges because you are going to make a very unique movie. One of the challenges on this movie, and there were a lot, is how do you make it really interesting, and how do you cast the right person who can sit inside of a mech suit, which I think she was on set in just the mech suit for like, I want to say 6 or 7 weeks. So it's just her in a mech suit acting opposite a disembodied voice that's coming through speakers and all these cameras, and she's by herself. And so part of the reason that I thought Jen was so amazing is because she is this global superstar, because she's used to going on stage by herself and driving a show to an entire stadium. That might suit going inside of this mech suit and performing to nobody in a way that a lot of actors wouldn't be able to wrap their arms around or embrace it. She's done this for a long time. It was still challenging, and I had to adapt in how I was a filmmaker in order to give her the freedom to be as intuitive as she needed to be. But part of the reason that I cast her was because of that background. And also, you know, look, she's obviously very, very talented, but I think the virtue that stands out the most to me about her is her courage. To be able to come from where she's come from, to get to where she's gone, and to do all the things she's done. You know, I think it was like Aristotle said, like the strongest virtue is courage, because without courage, the rest of the virtues don't exist. And it was like, I saw in her that virtue of being able to face any challenge. And I knew this movie was going to have a ton of them. And as soon as I realized that she had that in her as a person, I was like, okay, this is the right woman for the job. She's going to nail it. And I'm very, very proud of the performance she gave, because I think it's a very, very strong performance, and one that few people could pull off.
Well, she absolutely pulls it off. Everything about this movie to me works. My final question, because I only have a couple minutes with you left, is was there a particular direction that you found yourself giving to help people see a world that they can't see yet? If you understand what I'm saying, seeing something on the set where they can't see it yet visually.
This will amuse you more than anything. I would just say, no Hollywood bullshit, please. Because like, you know, like you're talking to your DP and they'll be like, light it in a certain way. And you're like, well, that's some Hollywood bullshit. Like, that doesn't feel real at all, you know, like, and he'd be like, what do you mean? And I'm like, there's no source light for that, or, you know, whatever, like a design. I'd be like, oh, that's some Hollywood bullshit. And because the thing is like you said, it's like, there's going to be enough Hollywood in this movie. It's a VFX driven extravaganza. Like it's a ride movie. So what I'm trying to do is ground it. And so I have to tell the technicians, please ground this as much as humanly possible. Please make the camera handheld in this moment, because we're falling, you know, to a planet. Like, it can't be clean and polished. So no Hollywood bullshit, please. That was that was my shorthand to get them to be like, oh, he means grounded, real, you know, because again, like I said, it's robots and an alien planet. Is like, it is a movie star movie, but I want it to feel real. I want it to feel lived in. So that was my quickest way to the answer.
Well, you know what? I love the direction and I love the movie. And thank you so much for spending some time with me. Great conversation with you, Brad. And congrats again on the movie.
Awesome, man. Thank you for having me.
And there you have it, a great conversation with Brad Peyton. Atlas drops on Netflix next Friday, the 24th. And shout out to Juniper Sparks for joining us on this podcast. Until next time, My name is Brad Gilmore. This has been Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time with the greatest film trilogy of all time. And I'll see you again in the future.